Welcome to the Everyday Psych Victims Project podcast.
God save the prescription path. Another life is thrown in hell. Nobody's gonna go to jail. I am an easy, I like talk. Must have forgot to check his mail. The war on drugs and invitations to another funeral. Experts will know best for your child. Distributing lessons, drugs from 6 weeks trials. They're very rich, everyone smiles. Oh well, oh well, oh well.
Welcome to the Everyday Psych Victims Project. Today we are joined by Ricardo, who will be sharing his experience of the psych system since a tender age. Hello, Ricardo.
Hello, Daryl.
How did you become indoctrinated into the mental health industrial complex, or as it was previously known as, the mental hygiene industrial complex?
I was brought into the complex by my mother, who assigned me to it after a family breakup, which left her as a single parent of many kids.
What treatments did this involve?
This involved drugging with dangerous SSRI drugs, which are a branch of allopathic medicine, which in Latin, allios means other and pathy means suffering, which means I got given drugs which caused me other sufferings, including psychosis, depression, aggression, chronic diarrhea. These are just some of the other adverse effects listed. Iatrogenic adverse effects. Itro meaning clinician, genic meaning born of the clinician. Iatrogenic adverse effects meaning adverse effects given to you by a clinician, by allopathic, allio meaning other, pathic meaning suffering, meaning I got other sufferings apart from my political domestic behaviors, which were turned into medical behaviors without any medical markers or medical examinations. They just got these guys with these allopathic drugs to give other sufferings and iatrogenically and cause me like 7 years of 50 diarrhea bouts per day, up to 50 bouts of diarrhea per day, because chronic diarrhea was just one of the adverse effects of just one of the drugs that I was taking. Namely, that drug was called epilin.
Were you given an accurate, informed consent of the harms of the mental hygiene treatments?
I had no idea that these drugs were the reason that I was going to have to poo 14 times every day before I'd had breakfast, or 14 times every day before I've brushed my teeth before I left the college. And then, there's the rest of the day, because that's the morning. Obviously, I have to poo throughout the day. So, no, I had absolutely no inclination. I wasn't given any accurate information about, the adverse effects of the mental hygiene programming. I also didn't realize that there had been no medical test done, and thus there was no medical markers. I had no idea about I had no idea that there was no medical markers for the testings that was being done. I was not properly informed. No, I was not properly informed in any level. I mean, like, if you have a domestic political behavior, you don't just turn it into a medical behavior without a medical reason for giving someone drugs that are going to cause them other sufferings, which they don't necessarily have, which are born iatrogenically, itro again meaning of clinician, genic meaning born of. So you don't give someone a bunch of plethora of diarrhea, aggression, disorientation, weight gain, lack of focus, sexual dysfunction. You don't do all of these plethora of things to people that, if you give most of them the full knowledge that this is what's going to happen, and we have no medical grounds for doing this to you. But we are the sole benefactors of the drugs that we produce. And thus, if we market it to you, we can recoup on the money and make massive profit. That's the only thing that makes sense in the whole drug prescription of the mental hygiene program. Sorry to delay that. I'd like to prolong that answer, but yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's a very good explained answer. That's what we want. How old were you when you were thrust into this?
I was originally 5 years young. This was like when my mum and my dad were breaking up, so my mum was looking at being a single parent, and she brought me here initially, but the breakup was not clean, and my dad was still involved and around the siblings, giving us money and, etc., and looking after one of the siblings, My mum was having a difficult time, and when I was 6, my mum had beaten up my brother, who was 15, and sent him to live with my dad. She literally violently attacked him because she just could not cope with the stress of being a single parent and trying to bring a new partner that she seemed to already have around into the home with this 15-year-old boy that had only grown up with his mum and dad. He found that hard. She realized he was a hindrance, and she obviously needed support, so she threw him out. Around this time, I was approaching 6 years young, so a few months after she managed to get rid of him, roundabout, less than a year after she managed to get rid of my older brother by throwing him onto my dad, then I was brought back to the psychiatric place. But this time my father was not there. This was a year after I was 5 when I was first brought here. So I was 6 when I was first left there. And my dad couldn't say he's fine, there's nothing wrong with him, he behaves for me. He wasn't there to say any of that. And, my mum basically got to decide what she wanted to do, which was, she told me to jump around and up and down the walls. And, she basically ended up leaving me there that day and walking off. And that was the beginning of being indoctrinated into this psych industry via my mum actually wanting a solution to basically, free her up to continue with her life, because she just had a breakup and was finding it difficult to cope. She had to escape the strains of parenthood, the life sentence, which parenthood is for many mothers, even though it isn't often described that way, it so much is. And so at 6 years young is when it effectively took effect.
Do you have still any long-term permanent harms, like with digestion or anything?
Oh yeah, my digestion is absolutely crazy. I mean, I used to have like no digestive issues, but now I have digestive issues. Like if I eat certain foods that I would like to, that everyone else eats, and they don't have problems, I have problems. I am the first one to have problems, and I am the one to have the most problems, and they are widespread. Even though I don't have 50 bouts of diarrhea every day like I used to, this is because I've totally remedied my diet into a healing tool where everything I eat is medicinal to maintain my ability to be able to indulge in other foods that I would like to have as comfort. But I have to do a certain amount of eating right. If I eat wrong for an entire day, the pain in my stomach is literally debilitating. It's immobilizing, and it is difficult to do anything. So if I want to have crisps or something, I have to make sure that on that day I have fruits and vegetables to balance that out. If I don't, just my bowels are just not as efficient as they used to be, put it that way, prior to taking the drugs, the legal drugs, and I'll call them allopathic drugs, just so that you know. The Latin of that word is they cause sufferings, other sufferings. And alleos can also mean beyond, although it's more commonly used to refer to other. So beyond the sufferings you have, or other sufferings which you don't have. And that's why every time you open your drugs, there is a list, and the list is way more extensive of sufferings, other sufferings that taking this drug will cause, and does begin to cause straight away. And this is also how these drugs work. That's why they cause other sufferings. They poison your body to remove one symptom, but that poisonous effect of taking these drugs, as we know, the word pharmakon literally means magical poisoner, which is very accurate, because this magical poisoner does poison you and actually get rid of that symptom, or limits or tries to restrict that symptom by giving you a plethora of other symptoms, which they also have drugs for, which is great. It's great business for the medical business. I mean, because they have a drug for every adverse effect that they could possibly cause. And not all of their drugs do actually effectively address those symptoms, especially when there's no medical markers taken. And they're just giving it to you based on a behavior, domestic behavior, social behavior, political behavior status. That's not something you can say, well, the medical marker of his political behavior is this. And this is why we're giving him this drug, because of his political behavior or his domicile behavior at home. Like when he's at home, his behavior is medically, we found the marker for this behavior at home and we give this drug, or we found the medical marker for this social behavior and we give this. No, those tests do not exist. They have not been done. No one being drugged by the psych guys, by the psychiatrists, have any of these tests. There's no neurobiology printout sheets. There's no magnetic encephalographic printout sheets from a brain scan that can convey some medical marker that needs to be interfaced with by this drug. It is literally, let us look at your social, political, and domicile behavior, and based on this, let us give you a bunch of poisonous drugs that will cause you a serious plethora of woes, based on the fact that we are making hundreds of trillions annually off of our business, but not based on the fact that we actually will correct your thing. There is no drug that is said to cure anything. There is no drug that is claimed to cure anything, especially in this kind of field where there's no medical congruency or correlation between the disease and the drug you're taking. There's a monetary congruency and correlation, but no medical congruency correlates to any political domicile, social behavior as far as the psychiatry goes. It's strictly monetary. You cannot find another link. If it was at least a real drug like a painkiller, you could go to them with inflammation and they would give you a painkiller which is known to bring down inflammation. At least they could medically look at you and say, I can definitely see inflammation.
Yeah. Yep.
So we're going to give you something that's a co-oxygenase inhibitor that's going to reduce the interleukin-6 TNF, tumor necrosis factor pathway, which produces inflammation, along with the perception of pain. We can give you a COX drug or a COX2 inhibitor or a COX inhibitor, a cyclooxygenase inhibitor. And the reason we can do that is because we can see there's seriously something wrong. If you show them a broken bone, they can x-ray that and they can actually put a physical cast around. Those are real doctors looking at real medical markers. Psychiatry just says your behavior is politically, socially dissonant. Without medical markers, we're going to give you medical drugs. They don't correlate to anything medical other than the money we're going to make. And that's how these SSRIs are being thrown out like candy for everything. Left, right, and center. Not because they work. Not because they work, but because people are indoctrinated.
I agree. Do you have any other long-term harms?
I have a slight sexual dysfunction, whereas I've gone from about 5 hours of being able to consecutively maintain a hard-ass erection and ejaculate about twice for just 5 hours of continuous hard fucking every day to about 1 hour tops. But I've recently, well, that's like 1/5 of my thing, but that puts me about an average guy my age, whereas I was like 5 times above average guy. I'd say less about around a year ago, until I actually took an antidepressant drug called levodopa, and that just fucked me up completely. That brought me down about 4 hours and about 2 ejaculations down, like on my daily sets practice of what I do. I'd say I've just been looking at the chemical monophosphate 5 glucoguaranus. I've just been looking at Viagra drugs and how they work basically, and I'm about to biohack and reverse engineer the way that Viagra drugs work, in a way where I'm going to use the natural organic foods and put the same chemicals that my body needs to bind and start the cascade of events which starts the escalation of an erection and the de-escalation of an erection, which is breaking a phosphate 5 down to a phosphate 1 to induce an erection, and turning that phosphate 1 back into a phosphate 5 to de-escalate an erection and cause de-erection. And basically, it is very similar to how our body would take sugar and make glycogen to store it, and then make a simple form of glucose to absorb it. The phosphate 5 is the glycogen, it's the complex bit that's stored, and then the phosphate 1 is the easily absorbable bit that's used by the I think it's called the Cavachor Canal. I've only looked at this literally once, briefly on drugs.com, and I already understand what I have to do. And I actually 100 million% believe that it'll be pretty easy for me once I start sitting down with my blender and I order a few nutrients or a few supplements off of eBay, guarana, and one of them that I'm thinking of ordering. And I just start messing around with a few chemicals that are actually health supplements, such as hydrogen peroxide. This used and produced by every cell in the human body produces hydrogen peroxide. But I'm going to use this and some other things, and I'm pretty sure that I'm actually going to fully remedy this condition. I just think I should do it sooner rather than later, but either way, I'm pretty sure I'll fully remedy it and maybe even be able to take myself further than I was before. But, you know, I am literally a rare case. Like if someone comes to me with cancer and they say they're terminally ill, my thinking is, let me go on PubMed, see what works against cancer. I find out what works against cancer, I start implementing it, and we start getting results. Or I show that information to someone, and someone can take that information, they might use it, and then they might literally get results that are just literally, you know, you're not going to get if you deal with allopathic medicine. Because, like, you would take chemotherapy, and just like allopathic suggests, it would cause you problems. Even if you were fully healthy and you took chemotherapy, it would cause other suffering. Your hair would fall out. You would suffer oxidative damage through most of the healthy tissues in your body, while the cancer cells would be the minimally targeted cells. You know, just as allopathic medicine suggests, they would cut you open and cut the cancer, which would cause other woes, such as like gaseous pressures in the other cutaneous layers of the skin. So we're not just talking about the dermis that's on the outside. We're talking about subdermal layers and layers that keep gaseous tissue pressures inside of your body, you know, that are not meant to be opened. You know, the inside of your abdomen is meant to be dark, or the inside of your head's not normally meant to be open. But allopathic medicine may open up these areas, and just by doing so, you know, they're going to cause you other sufferings that weren't there. You know, like lacerations and such things. You know, some of them invasive, brutal therapies, which are highly ineffective. You know, but as long as they're allopathic, they have to cause other woes and sufferings, or they would not be allopathic medicine. And that's what Western medicine is. It is allopathic. So they do exactly what they say. They just say it in Latin, so you wouldn't know. Everything that they say in Latin is accurate, even if they say arthritis. Literally, arthro means joints in Latin. Itis means inflammation. It's disease characterized by inflammation of the joints. Tonsillitis, itis means inflammation. The tonsils are the area that is characterized by disease, by inflammation in that area. Colitis is the colon, characterized by itis on the colon, which means inflammation in Latin. So when they say allopathic, as in other woes, other sufferings being caused, yes, allopathic medicine, everything it uses causes you to have other sufferings, other symptoms that were not there. And they literally name everything accurately in Latin. So they're doing exactly what they say they're meant to do. It's just no one knows the Latin root of these words when they walk into a doctor's office. So it is literally, effectively indoctrination, which occurs when you go to see a doctor. You go in to see a doctor, you get indoctrinated. That's normally what happens.
Do you consider what the psych system done to you breaching human rights?
Morally, I would consider it so. But if I actually read through the human rights and study what all of the human rights are, there's a lot of loopholes by which, you know, they could get away with not having breached human rights. Like, for instance, you know, I was not dragged out of my home to psychiatry initially, although this has happened since, but, you know, not initially. You know, we went into their office. My mum sat down as a complainant. I was cooperating with my mum. Even though I didn't fully understand everything, I was 6. You know, what 6-year-old child's going to fully understand psychiatry and that they're about to be left here by their mum who's going through a psychological breakdown because she's now a single parent with many children to raise. Like, I didn't fully understand the whole gravity, the whole magnitude of the situation. Though, yes, I would say it does very much use coercive strategies to make their services work. Even when they call it voluntary unworthiness, I beg your pardon, a voluntary admission, I do believe very much that they're using very coercive services. I believe the word voluntary and all of this are even obfuscated in the language that they use to make it sound as if it's voluntary, because then when you admit yourself as a voluntary inpatient and try to go to the shop, you try and just volunteer your way to walk over the road and buy some cigarettes, you realize that they're not going to let you leave this place for at least 30 days, even though you thought everything was absolutely voluntary, like you could just walk away at any time. It's not exactly the way it's painted on the tin, although, yes, like, I would say it breaches human rights. At the same time, I'd say on a technical basis, I'd have to know every single human right to credibly be able to debunk it. Because if I just say, yes, it does, and I don't know every single one of my human rights, which are applicable to me, and rights are what corporations have. So a person does have rights, and they can erect those rights to stand upright as a basis, of a defense. A legal defense if they were ever going to rebuke something in court, or if they wanted to contractually rebuke something on certain grounds, then those grounds could be founded on the grounds of them erecting, as in putting upright, their human rights, and only corporations have rights. So, when we say human rights, we're talking about the human corporation, the legal entity ascribed to our human name, having those rights. And because I don't fully know all of them, if I were to say yes, it does or doesn't, it's only as credible as far as I'm able to know the full matter of what my human rights are, and I don't know them all. But I presume and I imagine that it's probably conflictive with some of my human rights. For instance, not letting me go to the shop. But then again, I didn't read the contract that I took, when I voluntarily admitted myself. I didn't look at the contractual legal issues that the psychiatry people will use and must use to protect themselves, because they can't just lie to everyone and say it's voluntary and not let them out. They would be sued on a larger ground. These words have double meanings, and we need to know the legalese of them fully if we're going to say that, yes, on these grounds my human rights were violated, or to debunk that and say, actually, yes, they was violated factually, because I know all of my human rights and they were violated here, 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 and I should be able to show. And if I can't show that, then if I say, yeah, they violated my human rights without knowing them, I'm just a fool that's non-credible, that's being indoctrinated in the colloquial, common, collective, conscious consensus of what the word, the term human rights means. And I'm using it so loosely that it doesn't carry any weight, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want to be a hypocrite. Like, I perceive these people, or many of these people that I don't agree with for so long, I don't want to now adopt what they do and start to do it myself. That just makes me like them, and they're never going to be as good as me, and I'm going to bring myself down to their level, even though that is like a pride-filled statement. I'm just trying to... Yeah.
Have you received any apology or compensation?
I know I received absolutely no apologies. I haven't tried to make anyone give me an apology, but I haven't. And the funny thing is, if they did give me an apology for causing a plethora of other conditions with their allopathic drugs, that is something that, if it was given in writing or verbally with witnesses, or even without witnesses, those would be grounds for me to take them to court and sue them for damages. Doctors, and psychiatrists, and people who use allopathic strategies to implement iatrogenic adverse effects and illnesses. If they were to start apologizing for using poisonopathy and effectively succeeding at poisoning people, then those would be legal grounds to take them to court on the basis that they had made a mistake. And that is probably one of the reasons that I suspect they do not go around handing out apologies to people, because those could be legally, contractually binding, and those can be grounds to put them in prison, which is, not what people in those businesses are aiming to do. They're not aiming to go to prison. They've gone 3 years of medical. Yeah. They don't want to go to prison. But hey, it's not to say that there aren't grounds that I could potentially be taking these people to court and winning on, and there aren't compensations I could be seeking legally, and perhaps that is actually what perhaps I should be doing. In the meanwhile, I would really like to fix everything and actually get solutions out there to people for the sexual dysfunction, because that and thyroid conditions are the only two things that I've looked at in the whole plethora of medical woes that I do not know how to, I don't want to say reverse, because that would be making a medical claim, which, would be illegal of me. But that I don't theorize in my own theories, in my mind, fully understand how to 100 million% theoretically cure. It's just the sexual dysfunction right now and thyroid conditions. Those are the only two things I've come across. Everything else, from cancer to Alzheimer's to dementia, I believe, in my mind, that theoretically these are absolutely 100 million% easily curable based on the information that's on PubMed that I've read and based on what I've implemented myself. This is what I believe. So, yeah.
Is there anything else that you want people to know?
I do want people to know that you need to look into the nature of what this abysmal business is. They are circulating trillions off of these coercive services. And when you admit yourself into voluntary unworthiness and you're given drugs, you need to analyze the inserted slips, because the prescription that they give you with every listed selective serotonin reuptake inhibiting drug as an enlisted compliant patient actually has a plethora of woes that it will cause by the modus operandi of which their allelopathic drug works. Remember the word allele, meaning other, pathic, meaning suffering, meaning these drugs will cause other sufferings. It's the nature of the drugs. If they don't do that, it's not allelopathic. Homeopathic is called such because homeo means the same as, and pathy means suffering. And homeopathic medicine uses whatever your body is being poisoned or suffering by. It actually uses minute doses of that poison to stimulate a greater reaction of your own body to counteract it. Whereas that's homeopathic. Homeo meaning the same as, i.e. homosexuals like the same sex. Do you get it?
The Latin
alleos,
meaning.
Yes, and alleos literally means, it literally means other sufferings. These are sufferings that, were unbeknownst to you until you took these drugs. That's how allelopathic medicine works. That's how allelopathic drugs work. So, I think everyone out there needs to literally check the system that they're being given these drugs by, because it's not based on medical congruency. It's based on a empirical, meaning they just look and observe, statistical diagnosis. That's why they literally meaning between two, and gnosis meaning to know. So between you and your clinician, they statistically observe what between the clinician and you, the clinician is able to derive from you based on an empirical, meaning looking at you to see if it fits any of their statistics. That's why it's called a diagnostic statistical manual. The DSM-5 is the book that psychiatrists use to diagnose people. It's not in any way a medical book. If you take 350 milligrams of coffee per week, that's one large Starbucks coffee. If you live in America, then you officially have a coffee addiction, and they can drug you for that. That literally means in America you get one large Starbucks coffee, and there are loads of police officers getting a large Starbucks coffee every day in America that could be statistically diagnosed with having a coffee addiction because they exceeded 415 milligrams of caffeine in one cup. So literally, this is no way a medical book. This is a statistical diagnosing book for drugging people and making trillions. And if you're going to put your kids into that, just know your kid, if your female daughter is depressed, she can suffer sexual dysfunction. Her vagina might dry up so much she can't use it. And I don't think that's going to help her feel less depressed, because you've just given her allelopathic drugs. You've caused another kind of suffering that wasn't there, which is what allelopathy means. If your son's dick stops working, you might not have any grandchildren if you don't have enough children. Your sons and daughters, if you want, but this is the thing, you're giving them these drugs based on no medical basis. So, it's literally absurd, and you have to be indoctrinated to do this, and you have to be a wise man for this interview to make you yet wiser. Like it says, I believe it's in Psalms or Acts, Give a wise man wisdom, and he'll become yet wiser. Give a scorner wisdom, and you will be scorned. So, some people are just not wise enough to look these things up. It's the fact. Not everyone's mind is able to deal with the facts and this perceptual reality that are being conveyed here. And you're not meant to be able to perceive these cracks in our perceptual reality. That's why this business is so successful, because the majority of people do not. So it is literally, yes, you have to do a little Googling, but, like I told you, go on drugs.com. Start to look things up. Ask your psychiatrist for the medical markers. Ask your parents where their medical markers are. These things do not exist. Yeah, they may have done a blood test on you. It's not a blood test that's measuring the level of serotonin that they're messing around. No way. They're not neurobiologists. There's no neurobiology that goes into this. They vote these conditions into existence. They don't look at people and say, oh, we need this because this area of people are suffering from video game addiction. In 2014, they were going to vote anyone that went on Facebook, social media, or played FIFA online with their friends after school for half an hour or more, but as little as half an hour is having a video game addiction. That would allow them to drug the vast majority of society, because the vast majority of people are on either Facebook, WhatsApp for family that live in other countries, Twitter. People use these things, these social media things, for at least half an hour a day. It's highly common, But apparently this is meant to be sufficient. They were going to vote this in 2014 as a psychiatric condition. They vote these things in, and they have drugs that they'll be able to recoup massive amounts of money. And the more conditions there are to drug people for, the more money they can recoup. These drugs are not safe. These drugs do not work. Their trusts are liquidated every 7 years or so when they are sued from the amount of other sufferings that they cause to people, which is exactly what allopathic drugs do, cause other sufferings. They liquidate their trust name. They push their drug through the same doors of clinical research that first got their drug substantiated. And by going back through these clinical doors, it's easier because the tests have already been done. And if they add terry-coated coating on it or a sweetener in it, they've effectively changed the ingredients of the drug. It's a new drug. They give it a new trust name, so it's going by a different name. And this is how these corporations then only have to go back and recuperate maybe half or 2/3 or 1/3 of the money that they lost by liquidating their former drug trust. And they accumulate the snowballing effect of all the other money that they didn't lose out by recreating this trust, which, as I say, is in the trillions. So it's a massive, massive, massive monetary investment and, financial monetization by psychiatric, enslavement. That is literally what happens. You were a human being, and you go to these people, and then you're a human being used in psychiatric enslavement for financial monetization. And I know I drop a lot of live statements, but this is and yet this is what you need to go and look at for anyone that is putting their child into this or is looking at putting himself into this. Look at the Freedom of Information Act to the FDA to release 47% of all published and unpublished studies by drug companies, antidepressant drug companies, showing that 47% of all these studies, that's virtually 50%, proved that their antidepressants were as effective as placebo. So that's to say that virtually 50% of all antidepressants do not have any medicinal value whatsoever because they're as effective as placebo, and placebo has no medicinal value whatsoever. So the other 50% of studies where they didn't show they were only just as effective as placebo, you can imagine the amount that the effect is being substantiated in their studies is largely, on the vast majority, utterly negligible and, not very beneficial. So, but it's not to say, oh, what do you do if you're depressed? No, there are things you can do if you're depressed. There are nutritional clinical psychiatrists or nutritional, literally a branch of nutritional psychiatry where they won't drug you. They will give you supplements. They will give you certain foods to balance things out, and they will give you cognitive behavioral therapy, neuro-linguistic programming therapy, things where you can actually start to micromanage your own mind and thoughts to help yourself. There are also, without being drugged, because, what's the point of drugging and killing and sterilizing your patients if you're claiming that you want to help them, Along with this, there's also, you can go and look at nutritional studies on depression, anxiety, and stress scores that were done across like 14 Geico insurance companies in America. and they found that all of their workers experienced 50% more happiness, 50% less stress, 50% less depression, 50% less anxiety, 50% more emotional well-being, and 50% more energy. And the workload that was being produced by across these 14 different Geico insurance sites, that's a major insurance company in America, across 14 different sites of this company. That's a large amount to have a 50% workload increase from your workers just by giving them a vegan diet, by vegan options being included and being offered at those Geico insurance sites, company sites, to see a 50% increase in the workload just by offering that vegan option. So if you do have depression, scientists suggest that it's being caused by omega-6, which is arachidonic acid. It's an inflammatory, pro-inflammatory acid causing neuroinflammation. That's inflammation on the brain and the central nervous system, which is repressing the oxygen, the water, the nutrients, and the excretion that these cells are able to do. So, your blood is delivering everything. If it's just delivering inflammation, it's not as good as if your blood is delivering anti-inflammatory factors in terms of nutrients and activating gene pathways to bring down the inflammation in your head so your head can get oxygen, your head can get water, your head can get some vitamins and minerals and some omega-3 in there. And that is shown to actually help depression by, 50% in that particular study. And you could go look at studies like these, and then you can have this quiet moment with yourself in silence where you literally contemplate, would I benefit from reducing my stress, depression, and anxiety by 50% of whatever it is by implementing some of these factors into my diet? Given that it's caused by omega-6 arachidonic acid neuroinflammation, any anti-inflammatory diet you have is going to bring you away from depression on the scale of being depressed to not being depressed. Inflammation being at the depressed side and anti-inflammatory being away. And all whole plant-based foods have a degree of anti-inflammatory effects, especially when they're raw. Not that you have to have everything raw, but you should, most certainly have some fruits that you do like. For most people, it will be mangoes. That's a common one. Find out where to get your mangoes ripe in a really delectable way. Don't just choose some rubbish mangoes and say, I'm going back to McDonald's. Well, it's up to you. You do what you will because it's free will, and you will do what you will. But definitely look at the alternatives that work, because if you give a healthy person antidepressants, you can kill them. It's one of the allelopathic effects, allelopathic iatrogenic adverse effects. Is one of the other sufferings. You could make them permanently impotent, could make their vagina permanently not work, or you could kill them. Sudden death and death are also adverse effects. Psychosis is also another one. Suicidal ideation, aggression, homicidal ideation, psychotic episodes. Depression itself is a result of taking the vast majority of antidepressants on the market. I don't think I know of one antidepressant that doesn't list depression as one of its iatrogenic adverse effects. Literally, I'm not going to get addicted to mangoes. And they're one of the most alkaline fruits, mangoes, watermelons, lemons, but definitely go and look at maybe getting some kiwis, some bananas, some real bananas, the small ones. Definitely look into those things because they can be life-changing, especially if your child has autism. They have a digestive problem if they have autism, because 97% of people with autism have digestive problems. And that's because the relation between their gut and their brain is astronomical. So you need to get them off of dairy, you need to get them off the lactose and casein, which is in dairy, because they'll be allergic to both, and the gluten, which is in, gluten-containing foods. You need to look at those and then look at putting some anti-inflammatory foods in there to help them out, because the chances are that they have, neuroinflammation on the astral and glial sites of the right hemisphere of the brain. I know it's way too long-winded, but just in case you do have an autistic child, and I do have sisters that work with autistic kids, and they have actually seen a few kids in their class have their diets changed by their parents, and within 2 weeks to 2 months, these children have become absolutely non-autistic. They're able to now make eye contact. They do everything as a normal child. They become neurotypical within 2 weeks to 2 months, depending on which parent has implemented it. And sometimes it's as simple as removing things from their diet. And sometimes it's as simple as removing things and implementing some new foods into their diet. But literally, if you're going to drug your child and you're going to put them through this different level of existence because, You've been indoctrinated to think, hey, you have to eat dead animals. Show me the studies, because I've been on PubMed and I've not been able to find any studies proving that meat is utterly beneficial. I've been able to find a little bit of information suggesting a little bit of meat per year is good. And when I say a little bit, I might mean 5, 7 servings of meat per year. And really, it could be less. It could be as little as 3 servings of meat per year, and then the rest of it to be plant-based foods. And that's also where you see the longest living populations, where people live like this as well. And this is where you see the least amount of cancer and other diseases, where people live like this. In the 1950s,
in areas with less dairy, less extreme amounts of dairy, and
especially dairy. Dairy's the number one
lots of
killer.
Vegetables and stuff, as well as other things.
Yes, a lot of vegetables and fruits. I mean, after all, we don't have the digestive systems anatomically of carnivores or omnivores, because omnivores also digest food in their stomach acid, which is a pH as low as 1 or 2. Our stomach acid pH is about 4 or 5 when there's food mixed in with our stomach juices. And we don't do our digestion in our stomach. Our gut flora does 70 to 80% of our digestive work. And that's why when food leaves our stomach, it has to be neutralized. As soon as it hits the duodenum, it needs to be neutralized. And we have gut flora that literally digests our food's fiber. So even our insoluble fibers, our gut bacteria can actually work and digest those. We can't.
And it requires the proper use of neurotransmitters very heavily to do its job. The most amount of neurotransmitters or something are around the gut and beyond.
They are.
But
there's
we are running out of time, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to thank you very much for joining us and sharing your experiences.
Thank you very much, Dara. Okay, well, it was lovely. It was lovely to,
Hopefully we'll catch up again soon. Thank you very much, Ricardo.
Hopefully, indeed. Thank you very much. You have a lovely day, a wonderful day. And
take care, everyone. Save yourselves and save others.
Okay, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.